Traffic there. Turning to Micah, we're finishing off the book this morning. So turn to Micah chapter 6, please. Micah chapter 6. I'm just going to remind you of where we have been in Micah, just because we're finishing off the book, and I want to leave a closing message and a challenge of the book. You'll remember in chapters 1 and 2, or you'll remember first of all it divides into 3, just here, 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 and it's going to go from judgment to hope, judgment to hope, judgment to hope. And the first section, chapters 1 and 2, we saw God's two principles of how he judges, active and passive. Active judgment, coming down on the mountain and actually doing stuff. And then there's passive judgment, what a man sows that he reaps. If you want a good illustration, Eli and Hophni and Phinehas. In the priesthood, Hophni and Phinehas not doing what they should do, but Eli seems to be getting in on it. He gets bigger in life, and what happens? Hophni and Phinehas taken out by the sword, but Eli, what happens to him? Cause and effect, sow and reaping, gets the news, falls off, and what he put in then destroyed him, sowing and reaping. That's how God works. Chapters 1 and 2. Last week we saw God's dilemma in judgment, you'll remember. And we went through these 4 big sections, and you did really well to keep with me. Sorry, it was information overload, but I hope you got these main ideas out of it. How will God maintain his justice but yet keep his covenant? How does he punish sin but yet be true to Israel? And that was a dilemma that we faced last week. And in 4 movements, and 3 movements really, God showed us 3 things that his judgment, justice and judgment is about. That sin is punished. It's always punished. But don't get away with it. God always keeps covenant. And even in God's discipline of the nation, God is always working. This week, we're going to learn this. We've thought, firstly, how does God judge? Those 2 principles. Then, God's dilemma in justice. But this week, we're going to learn what the judge is like, what God is like in himself. You need the judge to be good. So a while ago, I was with a guy and I had to go to court with him, and you could hear people chatting about, and some of the guys were saying, is it a good one? Have we got a good one? And they were talking about the judge, because some judges you can get are very austere and they've been long in the tooth and they know the crack and they're not going to cut for nonsense. And then you get guys that are in and they're a wee bit naive, and and you've got different types of judges. It matters. What's God like as a judge? Could you trust him to judge this world? And this section's going to deal with that. And in chapter 6, we're going to be brought back to God's cosmic courtroom. And he's going to launch in again, and we're going to see his character through that, and it's going to be class. And then we see Micah responding to that in both sorrow and in hope. And then secondly, we're going to be brought to the choir room. I don't know if that's an actual thing, but they're going to sing anyway. Israel's national choir room. And they're going to sing about hope that they have, and then Micah is going to tell us about our God, his God, and the hope that we have. And by the end of it, I hope that we will see who God is, and we'll get a glimpse of him, because these passages are absolutely amazing, and I would love us to get a hold of them. So let's go quickly through the text. Now, last week I rushed through, and I realized that in amongst us we have probably 2 translations or more going on. And for those in the authorized, that might have been a wee bit difficult to follow, and I'm sorry for that. So what I've done, I'm going to put the ESV up on the screen so that you can, as we go along, then you can know where I am. So it's more so for me than for you guys. So let's go at this. God's cosmic courtroom, chapter 6 of Micah. Let's read it together, please. Chapter 6, please. Hear what the Lord says. Arise and plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the indictment of the Lord. and you enduring foundation of the earth. The Lord has an indictment against his people, and he will contend with Israel. Notice all of those words. Plead your case. The indictment. God's going to contend with you. In the ESV in verse 2, that word contend means he's going to determine what is right and what is just. And so God brings them to the courtroom. He asks the mountains to come because they are the most enduring thing about. They've been around for eons. They know the crack. That's the kind of idea. So they're the audience in the courtroom. They're almost a jury in the courtroom. And God brings his people to this courtroom. And what does he say in verse 3? What would you say? This is what God says. Oh, my people. Like, can you get the heart of God? Oh, my people, what have I done? How have I wearied you? Answer me. And you can hear God, you can sense his heart in that, eh? Oh, my people, what have I done against you? Why have I wearied you? And God starts to go into what he has done. And he's going to go from Egypt to the promised land in verses 4 to 5. So verse 4, for I brought you up out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of slavery. God redeemed them at great cost and at great power to him. God intervened into history and brought these people out. And how have I wearied you? You know, why are you not following me? Look what I've done. Are you guys enjoying your freedom? You enjoying that Sabbath rest that you would have never got before? Just work under Pharaoh? And God redeemed them, brought them out. Not only did he do it, he gave them leadership. I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. I sent before you Moses, that he could give you direction from God. He could mediate between you and God. I sent before you Aaron, that you could approach God. I sent before you Miriam, that you could praise God. And God's saying, have I wearied you? Look what I've done. He's redeemed them. He's given them leadership. Thirdly, he's protected them. What about Balaam? The son of Beor answered him. Verse 5. O my people, again, remember what Balak the king of Moab devised and what Balaam the son of Beor answered him. And he reminds him of that time that there was an attack on the people of God, and God defended them. And what one king wanted to curse them, God turned it around and blessed them. And his point is this: I have redeemed you, I have led you, I have protected you, I'm for you. Not only that, not only has he redeemed them, led them, protected them, but notice the last wee phrase. And what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. And that is the journey into the promised land, into Gilgal. And God's point is this: look what I've done. Do you think I'm not for you? Do you think I don't care for you? And I've wearied you. And this redeemed people, you can almost hear the heart of the judge. It'd be class if a judge had that kind of a soft heart, wouldn't it? A steer to the law, sure, but that kind of heart, compassion, investment in the people. And then verse 6 to 8, we see what God's requirements are. With what shall I come before the Lord? And how shall I bow before God on high? Shall I come with burnt offerings, with calves of old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? And Micah here kind of pictures a would-be worshipper asking this question of what shall I come before the Lord? And it's almost like too hard for him. And the Lord says, no. Like, I redeemed you out, and all I have put upon you is not all of these things. Not thousands of, you don't need thousands of calves to approach you. You don't need a torrent of oil to approach. You don't need to give up your firstborn. And that is like some kings were doing that in that day. They were throwing their children under the god of Moloch. A horrendous thing. You don't need to do that to come. What do you need? Verse 8. He has told you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? This. And it's accessible. It's within their grasp. Do justice. Love kindness. Walk humbly with our God. Now, this isn't anything about salvation. This is talking to a redeemed people, remember, brought out. And God doesn't lay upon them burdens galore, but what he does, he says, act right, lads. Do what is right. Love what is loyal. And walk humbly with their God. This is what God wanted. It was simple, it was social, it was singular, and it was accessible to them. God didn't put too much of a demand upon them. But what happened in verse 9, the voice of the Lord comes again. Verse 9, notice it there. The voice of the Lord cries to the city, and its sound wisdom to fear your name. Hear of the rod and of him who appointed it. Can I forget any longer the treasures of wickedness in the house of wickedness and the scant measure of which it is accused? Shall I acquit the man with the wicked scales and bag of deceitful weights? And you see what God is saying. Like, the rod is coming, and I am just, I am compassionate, completely compassionate, invested in the nation, but how can I possibly acquit the wrong? I can't. I have got, can you feel the heart of God through Micah here? Like, this is the character of the judge that sits on the universe, on the throne of the universe. This is the character of the judge that is going to bring everything together, and feel the compassion from him. Not willing that any should perish. He would that all should be saved. God so loved the world. But I can't let those people that are wicked off with it. Therefore, verse 13, I will strike you with a grievous blow, making you desolate because of your sins. You get 4 you shalls. You shall eat, but not be satisfied. And there shall be hunger within. You shall put away, but not preserve. You shall sow, but not reap. You shall tread olives, but not anoint yourself with oil. And you shall tread grapes, but not drink it. Why? For you have kept the statutes of Omri and all of the works of the house of Ahab. 2 of the most horrendous kings in Israel. That was their character. That was their ethos. That's what they did. And so God says, I don't want to judge, but I have to come down on iniquity. And that's what God will do. Then you get Micah's response. Into chapter 7, please. Micah's response, verses 1 to 7. David, in his book, he just entitles this portion, Sometimes All You Can Do Is Cry. For the prophet, he weeps, not for the judgment as such for the sins of the nation, but actually for the sins themselves. And you'll see that as we go down. And he starts listing them. So verse 1 of chapter 7, woe is me, for I have become as when the summer fruit has been gathered, as when the grapes have been gleaned, and there is no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig that my soul desires. The godly have perished from the earth, and there is no upright one among mankind. What he is talking about here, he is saying that he just feels alone. He's trying to live for God in a world that is absolutely godless. He's lamenting. He feels isolated. I've become like one fig left on the tree. Everything else is gone. Everything else has been picked. And he just feels alone and he feels isolated. And I tell you, it is a lonely thing to live for God. I remember working a while ago down the road in a call centre, and the majority of people that worked there were 20-somethings, and it was absolutely godless environment. And I remember going in every day, I was the only believer in the place, and just feeling absolutely alone. We should feel alone at times if we're living right, shouldn't we? And this is join the gym, because whenever you hit 40, you get love handles. And so I was in the gym on Friday night, and afterwards took opportunity. We sauna, sitting in the sauna. It's all packed, but it's all packed with like 20-somethings Friday night, all talking about the weekend. And boy, I felt alone. And I'm not any better. None of us are any better. But it's just where they're at. In the ungodly chat, ungodly ethics. And you can imagine Micah. declaring the word, preaching the word, and there's no one. There's no one. There's not a godly person. It says in verse 2, the godly has perished from the earth, and there is no one upright among mankind. And he just bows over and weeps. He doesn't judge them. That's God's duty. And that's what God will do. He weeps for them. He weeps for them. And he feels spiritually isolated. But second of all, he weeps because of the social peril. Notice chapter 2. The godly are perished from the earth, and there's no one upright in mankind. They all lie in wait for blood, and each hunts the other with a net. Their hands are on what is evil to do it well. The prince and the judge ask for a bribe. The great man utters evil desires for his soul, and they thus weave it together. The best of them is like a briar. The most upright of them is like a thorned hedge. And you see what he's saying, that there's social peril. The times are dangerous. Notice, it's all of them. It's intentional. They lie in wait. It's violent. They go for blood. It's savage. They're doing it with a net. It's treacherous with his own brother. And this is the state of the nation. And whenever Micah sees this, there's bubbles up in him, and he just weeps, because it's not just the people, it's the princes, it's the high person, whoever that is. They're just out for a bribe. No one is living for God. None of them. And if the best of them is like a briar, and the most upright is like a thorn hedge, what's the worst of them like? And Micah sees this social peril. But then, thirdly, not only spiritual isolation, social peril, but thirdly, you've got national ruin. Halfway through verse 4, it says, the day of your watchmen, of your punishment has come. Now there is confusion at hand. The watchmen were the prophets. You stand in the gap declaring the Lord. And what these watchmen have prophesied for years is about to come. There's got to be national ruin. But even into that, verses 5 and 6, there's relational breakdown. It's pretty crazy. Put no trust in a neighbour. Now he's gonna up the ante. Put no trust in a neighbour. Have no confidence in a friend. Guard the doors of your mouth with her who lies in your arms. And what he's saying here is you can't trust anyone, whether it's your wife or a stranger. You can't trust anybody. Verse 6, for the son, you're going to get the up ante again, for the son treats his father with contempt. The daughter rises up against her mother, the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And he sums it up by saying, a man's enemies are the men of his own house. What a state of the nation. Now, I think we can see elements of this in our society, unfortunately. And that should cause us to go home today and really weep and really pray. What does Micah do? And this is one of the they're all class verses, but verse 7 says this, but as for me, I think that's really important. They can live one way if they like, but as for me, it's almost Joshua, but as for me in my house, but as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. And Micah, what he does, he bemoans, yes, but then he turns to believe. He laments and then he looks, not to the situation around, but he looks up. And he looks up to a God of power. Notice what he says. I will look to the Lord, the sovereign, powerful one. And then he says, I'm going to endure till God's time. I will wait for the God of my salvation. He has promised. I can trust him. He has promised. And I'm going to wait. And then thirdly, he finds rest in God alone. My God will hear me. And the point is this, Micah, you're not alone. And in the sauna, you're never alone. In the workplace, you're never alone. Although you might be surrounded by godless, you're never alone because God hears us. That's such a comfort tomorrow as you go into work, as you go into uni or wherever you're going. that you're never alone, that God is with you in that circumstance and in that situation. And Micah stands. But then we gain hope, remember? So we've seen the cosmic courtroom and what happened there, and God bringing his people and sentencing them. Micah's sorrow and hope, but now we're going to see Israel's national choir room. So let's just read it together. And we're going to see this, I'm going to go over this pretty quickly actually, verses 8 to 17. I'm just going to give you kind of cliff notes or highlights of it. So verses 8 to 10. We're going to see three things here. We're going to see a psalm of confidence, verses 8 to 10, an oracle of salvation, verses 11 to 13, and a prayer of supplication, verses 14 to the end of verses 14 to 17. And we have switched now from judgment to hope. And it is a class portion, but notice verse 8, for example, in this song of confidence. Rejoice not over me, O my enemy. When I fall, I shall rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. And what he is saying here, yes, we will fall, but we'll rise. We will go into darkness, but we will be brought into light. And he's rejoicing in that. And his enemy, in verse 10, then my enemy will see, and shame will cover her who said, where is the Lord your God? And the people that have mocked them in exile and have said to them, where is your God? Well, they will be absolutely refuted now. Why? Because God is going to redeem his people. Then number 2, an oracle of salvation. Verse 11, a day for the building of your walls, a day for the boundary that shall be extended. In that day they will come to you from Assyria, from Egypt to the river, from sea to sea, to the mountain to mountain. And what's he saying? Is that the people, remember what happened in chapter 4? Where Jerusalem is set up and the whole of the nations come to Israel. This is what he's saying. A day for the building of your wall. That's not a wall of defense, apparently in the original. It's more like we would see up the moorings, a stone wall, a dry stone wall. And it's not for defense, it's just for demarcation. And that wall that's around Israel, they'll not only regain that, but it'll be extended. And not only that, people will come to them from between the mountains, from between the seas, from between the nations. Everyone from all of the earth will come. Such a promise, such an oracle. So not only is there a psalm of confidence, an oracle of salvation, but lastly and quickly, verse 14, there's a prayer of supplication. Notice it, verse 17, shepherd your people. This is what Micah is praying. Shepherd your people with the staff, the flock of your inheritance, who dwell in the forest, in the midst of a garden and land. Let them graze in Bashan and Gilead, as in the days of old. And what he is saying is, let Jerusalem be lush. There was a time when the nation was coming into the promised land, and 2.5 tribes east of Jordan, what they did was they settled down. Why? It was so lush. In Bashan and Gilead. And that's what he's saying. Make Jerusalem like this again. And this is the class thing. Verse 15, the Lord answers. And he says this, as in the days when you came out of the land of Egypt, I will show them marvelous things. And he's coming full circle. That's how he started. In Egypt, remember, delivering them out. But he's saying, just like what happened in Egypt, I am going to show them marvelous things. I'm going to do wonders and works. And it's a class one-liner that we get from the Lord. And that will mean in verses 16 and 17 that the nations that are enemies of God will be all put down in humiliation, frustration, and intimidation. Quite a section. But then we get to Micah's response again. And this is just wonderful. He's not responding now, woe is me, but he is saying, who are you? And in verses 18 to 20, he focuses in on the judge of the whole of the earth. Who is like you? That's rhetorical. There's no one like him. It's not even that he's different. He's unique. Who is like you? Who is a God like you? Number one, pardoning iniquity, passing over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance. pardoning iniquity, passing over transgression. He does not retain his anger forever because he delights in steadfast love. He will have compassion on us. He will tread on our iniquities underfoot. You will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. You will show faithfulness to Jacob, steadfast love to Abraham, as you have sworn to our fathers in the day of old. Class verses just talking about who the character of this judge is. He is one that loves to pardon iniquity. He is one that loves to pass over transgression. And if I could just say 2 minutes on this. In our first section, we saw that one of the principles of God's judgment was sow and reap. Now what I mean by that is not karma. It's not a principle that's unmanaged, that's just sow and reap. That's not who God is. It's not what Christianity is. What I mean by that is that you have a God that arbitrarily... Wouldn't it be so horrendously hard if we lived in a world that was just cause and effect? Would you have survived this week? I think I'd have been judged by... You know what I mean? If it was just cause... How horrendous, how hard, how difficult to live under that. But this is what it's saying, that we don't live under that kind of principle. We live under a God that arbitrates that principle. It's a very different thing. And so we have a God that could punish... No, I'll pass over transgression. I could judge. No, I will pardon the iniquity. Isn't that class? Isn't that who God is? That he is one that's great enough, big enough, compassionate enough to be able to arbitrate this whole universe in justice. He pardons the iniquity. He passes over transgression. He does not retain his anger forever. Why? And this is probably the line for me of the book. He delights in steadfast love. Hesed, loyal. God delights in it. Like God delights in forgiveness. God delights in loyalty and love. God delights in that. He delights in pardon and delights in passing. That's who God is. He absolutely delights in it. He delights in it. Well, okay. You can get a glimpse of who God is. And you can get a glimpse of who this judge is and why it's important that he is the judge and we are not. Just as we sum up, what do we learn from the book of Micah? And I want to give you 3 points just as we finish. I think we can learn to weep, to speak, and to keep. Go to chapter 1 again, please. Verse 8. In light, and remember the context, God's telling us 2 ways that he judges, active and passive, and that he will judge. In light of that, what are we to do? Verse 8. Micah says, "For this I lament and wail. I will go stripped and naked. I will make lamentation like the jackals and mourning like the ostriches, for her wound is incurable, and it has come to Judah. It has reached to the gate of my people, to Jerusalem." This is one of the verses that has struck me about Micah, and I just want to emphasize it as much for you as for my own heart. That in this context in chapters 1 and 2, where God will judge, Micah is just overcome. He just laments, he breaks down, he is a mess because of people around him that are going to be judged, of people that are going to come under God's judgment. And if there's one verse or a couple of verses that I could leave with you in Micah, this is one of them. That we would, and you can't work it up, as I said before, it is about spending time with the Lord. It's about hearing him and letting him work in our heart and being open and honest where we are. Lord, I haven't wept over souls in weeks, months, years, decades. Lord, I haven't. But work in my heart, Lord, and make me like Micah. And in face of the judgment, Lord, help me to weep. Number 2, chapter 3. verse 8. And these are just wee glimpses we get into Micah. In light of God's genius and how he can pull together judgment and how he works it together, in light of that, verse 8, Micah, but as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin. If we are to weep, we are to speak. And in light of God's genius, in light of what he has done, in light of how he will work things out, we can have confidence to speak. Being filled with the Spirit of power and of God. Being filled with justice. That is, that it becomes part of our DNA. And see that word might? It basically means manliness, courage. Because that's what it takes to speak, isn't it? And so tomorrow, or as weeks go on and we start to learn to weep over souls, God will give us courage to speak to souls around us. Listen, this is what we need. And I am convinced of this more and more, that if I am more speaking to people about the Lord, more people are going to get saved. It's simple. And I only start speaking to people when I weep, but when I weep, I start to speak. And then go into chapter 7 again. If I weep, I speak. But brothers and sisters, keep. Verse 7. In light of the situation around him, remember, and everything that's going on. Verse 7, but as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait. I will keep waiting. That's the emphasis. I will keep waiting for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. The encouragement that we can take whenever we leave this book of Micah is to keep going. Micah kept going. Isaiah kept going. The task that they were given was just immense and difficult and hard and lonely and all of the rest. And they kept going. They kept enduring. And brother and sister, in this world that we are living, as difficult as it is totally against us as it is, could I encourage us all just to keep going, not by generally looking at the world, because that discourages you, but looking to the Lord. He has promised he's going to make. He has promised he's going. He has promised he's going to. He has promised he's going to. I'm going to believe him. I got to believe him. I'm going to look to the Lord and wait for the God of my salvation. And so as we leave Micah, I want to leave you 3 words. Weep, speak, and keep. Keep going. He's a God of justice, and he will bring justice to this world. Let's just pray.